Montana Territory, spring of 1881, the morning frost still clung to the fence rails when the world ended for Preston Rourke. He stood in the middle of what used to be his wheat field, boots sunk in mud, smoke curling from the charred remains of his barn and half the house. The fire had taken almost everything in the night, but it was the silence that came after that hurt the worst. No laughter, no footsteps, no voices calling him in for supper. His wife and son had been inside. Preston's hands hung limp at his sides. He had fought the fire until his palms blistered and his lungs burned, but it had moved too fast. The doctor from town said they died in their sleep. He did not remember much after that. 3 weeks passed. The townsfolk offered help, but Preston barely spoke. He slept in the root cellar, worked from dawn to dusk like a machine, and avoided the house entirely. He kept the land because it was all he had left, but the silence was a weight that never lifted. Until the night he heard footsteps in the barn that was supposed to be gone. The far side of the structure had somehow survived the fire, a half-collapsed wall and 2 stalls still standing. He had not gone near it since that night. But now, as the wind picked up, he heard something shift. He grabbed his rifle and yanked open the door. A girl scrambled up from the hay, arms raised. "Please know I am not stealing nothing." Preston lowered the rifle an inch. Her voice was hoarse but clear. She was young, not too young, maybe 20, 22 at most. Her dress was torn at the hem, dust on her cheeks, and her hair was tied back in a messy braid that had not seen a brush in days. "You hiding?" Preston asked, voice flat. "Yes," she swallowed, then stood straighter. "I am sorry for trespassing. I had nowhere else to go." He studied her. She was not from town. He would remember if he had seen her before. "You alone?" "Yes," he nodded once. "You can stay the night, but I want the truth by morning." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." Preston left her a blanket and a canteen, then walked back into the dark. By morning she was still there. He brought coffee and sat on the edge of a hay bale, eyeing her as she sipped from the tin cup. "My name is Eliza Braith," he gave a nod. "Preston Rourke. I was supposed to meet a man in Miles City. I came by train." He never showed. "Mail order," she hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we wrote letters for months. I sold everything I owned to make the journey. But when I arrived, all I found was a lie. The address he gave me was empty. No one had heard of him. I waited 3 days. Then I ran out of money. Some men started following me. I walked for 2 days until I saw your barn." Preston rubbed his jaw. "You picked a bad time to come." "I know." He stared at her for a long moment. She did not look away. She was scared but not broken. "You hungry?" "Yes," she said, voice cracking a little. "Come inside." They ate in silence. Preston had not cooked for anyone in weeks, but he managed eggs and toast. She thanked him twice. After breakfast, he asked, "You plan on going back east?" "I cannot." "Family? Dead, all of them." He nodded again, more to himself than her. "I never wanted to marry a stranger," she said quietly, "but I thought maybe I could start over, be useful, make a home." Preston leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You still want that?" She blinked. "What?" "You said you wanted to make a home. You still want that?" Her lips parted. "Yes, more than anything." He stood up and grabbed his coat. "Then come help me fix the porch." She stared. "You want to stay here," Preston said. "You work. I do not need charity and I do not offer it. But if you are willing to earn your keep, there is room here for someone like you." Eliza nodded slowly. "I can work." She followed him outside. The porch needed new planks and the steps were half rotted. Preston handed her a hammer. She took it without hesitation. They worked side by side. She asked no questions. He gave no explanations. But by the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the porch stood straight and clean again. That night, Eliza moved into the small room off the kitchen, the one that used to belong to his son. Preston laid a folded quilt at the end of her bed. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke." "Preston," he said. She smiled. "All right, Preston." He paused at the door, watching her settle in. Something eased in his chest as he listened to her unpack the few things she had: a comb, a folded letter, a small silver cross. For the first time in a long time, the house did not feel so empty. The next days rolled by slow but steady. Eliza helped with chores, mended shirts, and patched a broken window. She asked about the land and listened when he explained how the irrigation ran. She never pushed, never pried. But on the sixth night, when a storm rolled in and thunder shook the walls, she knocked on his door and whispered, "Could I sit with you? Just until the storm passes." He nodded and moved aside. They sat by the fire, shoulder to shoulder, saying little. At one point, he handed her a mug of warm cider. Her fingers brushed his. "I did not think I would ever feel safe again," she said softly. Preston looked at her, really looked. The firelight danced across her face, and he saw the strength there, not just survival, hope. "You are safe here," he said. She turned to look at him. "Thank you." He hesitated, then reached over and took her hand. She did not pull away, neither of them let go. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, something new began. The days lengthened into May, and the valley greened in slow hushes, first the willows by the stream, then the wheatgrass stretching toward the sun with cautious grace. Preston worked the land in steady rhythms, and Eliza moved beside him with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands raw from labor she never complained about. One morning, she stood beside the corral, watching the gelding circle slow and stubborn. Preston leaned on the gatepost, arms crossed. "You don't take to strangers," he said. "I reckon I'm not a stranger anymore," she replied, picking up a coil of rope. Preston didn't speak, just watched as she stepped inside the ring with the horse. She didn't rush, she didn't coax. She simply stood there, still and even, until the animal slowed, nostrils flaring. Later, as they set out fence posts along the north edge, he asked, "Where'd you learn horses?" "My uncle in Kentucky bred Morgans. I was the only one he trusted to ride the green ones." She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "He used to say a horse and a woman both want the same thing, room to breathe and someone who don't lie." Preston chuckled low in his chest. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. She glanced over, surprised. "Didn't know you could do that." "I forgot," he said, still looking down the fence line. That evening, as dusk softened the sky and the first of the frogs sang along the creek, she was in the kitchen, kneading dough with her hair tied up in a red kerchief. He watched her from the doorway, hesitant. "Eliza," she turned, hands dusted in flour. "Yes, I've been thinking, this land's good, but it's too much for one man. I can't pay wages, but I could offer something steadier." She tilted her head. "What kind of offer?" "I don't have the right to ask." "Not yet, but if you stayed on, if we keep building what we've started." She stepped toward him, wiping her palms on her apron. "You're not asking for a servant, no, or a favor." "No," she studied him, her gaze steady. "You're asking for something real." He nodded. "I'd want more than a roof and a warm stove," she said. "I'd want a say in things, a voice. You'd have it." She folded her arms. "And I'd want us to be equals, no matter what folks in town think." "They already talk," he said quietly. "I know, let them." He took a step closer. "I don't want to rush you. I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to be." He reached for her hand then, slow and careful, like he wasn't sure if she'd let him. But she did. Her fingers curled into his, firm and sure. The next morning, she moved her things into the larger bedroom at the back of the house. No words passed between them about it. There was no need. They planted beans and corn, repaired the chicken coop, and rode to the edge of the creek one Sunday afternoon with a basket of bread and smoked trout between them. She sat cross-legged on the blanket, sun warming her bare forearms, while he lay back in the grass, one hand behind his head. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I didn't," he said. "Not until I opened that barn door." Her eyes met his. "I believe in them now." He reached over and touched a strand of her hair that had slipped from its braid. "You gave me one. You gave me one too." They stayed until the shadows stretched long and the light turned gold on the water. When they rode home, she leaned her head against his shoulder for a moment. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and placed his hand on her knee, steady as the land beneath them. The summer settled in slow and dry, the kind of heat that pressed down on the land without mercy. Dust lifted in low spirals from the wagon tracks, and the wheat stretched brittle and gold across the ridge. Preston rose early each day, shoulders darkened by sun, and Eliza kept pace beside him, her apron stained with dye from the elderberries she boiled for preserves. One morning, as they hauled lumber from the shed to rebuild the back wall of the smokehouse, she paused to shade her eyes. "That ridge to the west," she said. "I saw smoke rising there yesterday, just a thin line." Preston set the board down and followed her gaze. That's Old Crow Land. Sometimes they pass through in early summer, run buffalo up past the basin. She nodded, thoughtful. I've never met a crow woman. Only heard stories. They kept to themselves mostly, till the government started pushing them east. There's a camp near the Tongue River, but they don't stay long in one place. Eliza brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Seems like the only thing anyone's allowed anymore is leaving. Preston didn't answer right away. He picked up the next board, settled it across the sawhorse, then finally said, My father was part Cherokee. His mother walked the trail. Never said much about it. Eliza blinked, surprised not by his heritage but by his offering. Did you know her? He shook his head. She died before I was born, but my father used to carve her symbols into the barn beams. Said they were meant to bless the land. She looked toward the barn, the half-burned timbers now hidden behind new cedar planks. Are they still there? Some. I left what I could. That night after supper, she lit a lantern and walked out alone. Preston watched her from the porch, not following. She returned after a long while, face unreadable. They're beautiful, she said. I traced one with my finger. It felt like something was still alive in the wood. His voice was quiet. Maybe it is. Later in August, a letter arrived from the land office in Helena. Preston read it twice, jaw tightening. She found him under the cottonwood by the creek, the letter folded in his hand. What is it? They're offering to buy the North Slope. Say it's better suited for cattle than wheat. Want to lease it to some operation out of Bozeman. She sat beside him, knees drawn up. Will it help? It would pay off the loan on the seed, cover the roof repairs, but we'd lose the orchard. She tilted her head. Do the apples still come in? Not like they used to. But my boy planted one of the rows himself back when he was 6. Marked every tree with a horseshoe nail. Eliza hesitated. If we keep them, it's not for money. No, she picked up a stone and rolled it between her palms. We could graft the healthy ones. Start new rows closer to the stream. His brow furrowed. You know how to do that. I watched my mother do it every spring. She said trees remember kindness. Preston looked at her for a long moment, then crumpled the letter and tossed it into the water. Then we'll keep the trees. That evening, she knelt beside the hearth, sorting through old seed packets and broken chalk slates. He joined her on the floor, their knees touching. I don't want this to be something we fall into, she said. I want to know where we're going. I was never good at planning past the next frost, he admitted. You don't have to be, she said. You just have to want the same things. He turned toward her. What do you want? I want to wake up in the same bed every morning, knowing the person beside me sees me fully. I want to raise hens and maybe goats. I want to laugh at the table. And someday, if we're lucky, I want a child who learns this land like it's part of their skin. Preston's throat worked as he swallowed. You still sure? She asked. He reached out, placed his hand over hers. I've never been more sure of anything. That night, they didn't speak much. But when he reached for her, he did so with both gentleness and certainty. They lay beneath the quilt she had stitched herself, and as the wind whispered through the shutters, he pressed his lips to her temple and said, You're not what I lost. You're what I found. She answered not with words, but by pulling him closer, her breath steady, her hands sure in the stillness that followed. Nothing felt unfinished. The first frost came early, crisping the tops of the grass before the wheat was fully harvested. Preston and Eliza had worked until their backs ached, but there was still the Westfield to bring in. That morning, she pulled on his spare wool coat, sleeves rolled twice at the wrist, and tied her braid tight before stepping out into the pale light. Ground's hard already, she said, lifting the edge of her skirt to step over the ladder stile. We'll lose the far rows if we wait another week. Preston adjusted the strap of the grain sack over his shoulder. We'll work through supper if we have to. They did. By the time the sun dipped behind the low ridge, their hands were raw, and the cart was piled high. Preston pulled the tarp over the grain as Eliza leaned on the wheel rim, breath shallow but even. We'll need more help next season, she said, brushing a seed husk from her sleeve. I thought about hiring one of the Hall's boys from downriver, he said. The older one's near grown, she nodded, thoughtful. Then maybe I could focus more on the kitchen garden. There's space behind the smokehouse where the soil's darker. He pulled off his gloves, tucking them into his belt. You want to turn that patch, we'll do it. They walked back in silence, the cart creaking behind them. When they reached the house, Eliza paused at the porch, fingers resting on the rail. "I think we should be married before the winter," she said. Preston stopped. "You sure?" "I've been sure. I just didn't want it to feel like something we slipped into without asking." He stepped closer, voice low. "I want it too, but not for the sake of being proper. I want it because I wake up thinking of your voice and go to sleep thinking of your hands. I didn't know I could want anything again, and now I don't know how I'd go on not wanting you." Her eyes brightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached up, cupped his cheek, and said, "Then let's make it real before the leaves fall." They were married in early October in the small clapboard church 3 miles south. The preacher's wife lent Eliza a shawl stitched with faded roses. Preston wore his only black coat, brushed clean, with a new button sewn on the front. Only a few neighbors stood witness the Turners from the next valley, old Clara who'd brought them eggs in the spring, and 2 boys from the trading post who watched with quiet curiosity. Eliza's fingers didn't tremble when she laid her hand in Preston's. She said the vows clear and sure, her gaze steady. Preston's voice caught once, but he didn't falter. Afterward, they rode home in the wagon, the wind lifting the edge of her shawl as she leaned into his side. That night, the house felt different. Not simply fuller, but rooted. By November, snow had dusted the ridge, and Eliza had lined the windows with sheep's wool to keep out the cold. She stitched curtains from old sacking and pressed dried mint into small cloth pouches to freshen the drawers. Preston reinforced the roof beams, laid in fresh firewood, and repaired the latch on the cellar door. One evening, as he carved a set of wooden pegs for the hallway, she sat beside him by the hearth, mending a tear in one of his shirts. "You'll need a new coat before spring," she said. "I can patch the elbow. You've patched it twice already," he glanced over. "You planning to make one?" "I could," she said. "If we trade preserves for wool at the post. Mrs. Wallace keeps sheep." Preston set down the knife. "You think about everything." "I have to." He shifted closer, voice quiet. "I want to give you more than this. A proper home, a barn with a roof that don't leak, a cradle for someday." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You think I married you for what you could give me?" she asked. "No, but I want to." She set aside the shirt, folding it once. "Then promise me we'll grow things, not just wheat. I want to grow a life with roots." He reached for her hand, their fingers lacing easily. "You already planted it." "I'm just learning how to tend it." The fire crackled, and the wind rose outside. Inside, their shadows moved together on the wall, quiet and close. By the end of the month, the orchard lay bare, but one sapling near the stream still held its leaves. Eliza stood beside it one morning, a wool shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Preston joined her, his breath visible in the cold. She pointed to the lowest limb where a single apple clung, red and stubborn. "I think we'll call that one Hope," she said. He nodded. "Seems right." She turned to him, eyes soft. "Spring will come." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. It already did. The snow deepened as December settled in, softening the hills and blanketing the split-rail fences in white. Eliza stood by the window one morning, watching the flakes fall thick and slow, knitting a collar onto a thick wool undershirt she had cut down from a larger coat. She had taken to rising before Preston, setting the kitchen fire and steeping dried wild mint in the kettle before the sun breached the ridge. Preston came in from the shed, boots heavy with snow, and placed a wrapped bundle on the table. "Stopped by the post on my way back from cutting pine. Something came for you." Eliza set her knitting aside and peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a small, cloth-bound book worn at the corners, the pages softened by years. She turned it open slowly and smiled. "My mother used to read this aloud," she said. "Every winter, when the nights got long." Preston leaned against the table, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Figured it might be something worth keeping." She didn't answer right away, but she set the book carefully on the shelf above the stove beside the tin where she now kept her thread and buttons. That evening, she read aloud from it while he carved a new handle for the axe. Her voice was even, unhurried, and when she looked up between pages, his gaze always met hers. By late winter, the roof had held through 3 storms, and the chicken coop once more had a working latch. They'd found a rhythm deeper than mere routine, a quiet knowing, a trust that worked harder than words. Sometimes, Preston would pause mid-chore just to watch her move through the snow in his old flannel coat, the hem brushing her boots. She no longer asked if she belonged. She had made the place hers in the way she touched it with care, with intent, with presence. One morning, toward the end of February, Eliza came in from the barn with a flush in her cheeks and a stillness in her step that gave him pause. "I think we'll need the second cradle," she said, standing in the doorway, her hand resting low against her belly. Preston stood slowly. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened, and after a moment he crossed the room and placed his hand gently over hers. "You sure?" She nodded. "It's early. But I've known since the thaw began." He kissed her then carefully, reverently, like a man who'd been given something once thought lost forever. When he pulled back, he kept his hand over hers. "We'll build that cradle together," he said. By the time the first shoots of spring pushed through the thawed ground, Eliza had begun marking the days with a piece of chalk on the pantry door. Preston planted a new line of saplings down by the creek, each one spaced with care. He used the same horseshoe nails his son had once carried in his pocket, pressing each into the bark as if anchoring them to the earth. They rode into town just once that season, trading preserves and dried herbs for flour, sugar, and a bolt of soft, unbleached muslin. Eliza chose it for its strength, not its beauty, and spent the next weeks cutting and hemming small garments by lamplight, her fingers steady though her eyes often stung. Preston would sit by her, whittling toys with smooth edges, sanding them down until even the corners felt safe. In early June, Clara came to stay a friend now, not just a neighbor. She brought a jar of pickled onions and a bundle of sage to keep under the pillow. Eliza smiled when she saw her, but she never left Preston's side for long. The birth came on a clear night, the stars sharp above the roofline, and the moon strong enough to see the path from the house to the barn without a lantern. Preston didn't sleep. He stayed outside the bedroom, back against the doorframe, listening for each sound. When it was over, Clara opened the door and beckoned him in. Eliza lay curled on the side of the bed, her hair damp, her hand resting beside a small bundle wrapped in the muslin she'd sewn. Preston crossed the room, slow and silent, and looked down into the wide, blinking eyes of a daughter. "She's strong," Eliza whispered. "Like you." He touched the baby's forehead, then Eliza's, then leaned down to press his lips to hers. "No," he said softly. "Like you." They named her Ruth, after the woman who had once shown kindness to Eliza's mother when she was just a girl with a runaway heart and no place to land. No one else had the name in the valley, and that felt right. By the end of summer, Ruth had hair like pale straw, and she would quiet only when Preston hummed the old tune his father used to sing under his breath while sharpening tools. Eliza would watch them from the porch father and daughter his calloused hand cradling her tiny back, his voice low and sure. The orchard bloomed again that year, not just with blossoms but with fruit. The trees Eliza had grafted from the old rootstock bore their first apples, small, tart, and hearty. She lined them in rows across the pantry shelves, red against the dim wood. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the hills turned honey-colored, Preston took Eliza's hand and led her down to the edge of the creek where they'd once picnicked. Ruth slept bundled in a sling across Eliza's chest, her breath warm against her mother's collarbone. Preston knelt at the spot where the new trees stood taller now, their leaves full and dark. "I carved something," he said, brushing dirt away from the trunk of one. There, just above the second nail, he had etched a name hers followed by his, and beneath them, the word home. Eliza ran her fingers over the letters and smiled, the kind of smile that held everything she'd been and everything she'd become. "I never thought I'd find this," she said. "You didn't find it," he replied. "You built it." They sat there until the stars came out, the water whispering below, the trees rustling above, and Ruth breathing soft between them. And that's how they lived, side by side, building season upon season with nothing unspoken between them, and no part of the land untouched by their quiet, enduring love.